Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Back with us today is meteorologist Greg Soulje. Welcome, Greg. Thank you for joining us here today.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Always a pleasure to be hanging out with you guys and talking weather. So hopefully everyone has made it through thus far in fairly good order this summertime season. Some far more comfortable than others this summer season.
For those of you that are tuning in, if you have any questions for Greg, feel free to post those there in the chat, or if you're joining us from social media, put your questions in those channels directly. Yeah, we've kind of, it almost feels like fall out here in some of these areas. I bet you're going to tell us summer isn't over yet, but maybe, I think you also teased last time that you're going to give us a little fall forecast as to what's ahead.
Yeah, especially, last week around here when we had readings that were only in the 70s. And boy, I was about ready to just jump off the ledge here when I started reading social media. Oh, it's a fall weather pattern. Here comes fall. Feels like fall. It's early, just nowhere near it. There's nothing resembling fall at all on the weather maps and charts going forward here. We'll kind of let the cat out of the bag briefly here, but we'll have that long range forecast for the fall season here and a winding down of El Nino. And a couple of thoughts on wintertime as we transition to kind of a neutral state and kind of put the pedal to the metal and move right into a La Nina. And sometimes La Nina plus wintertime ends up building character, we'll put it that way. But we'll worry about that and talk about that later on in the broadcast here. But let's begin to roll things. What do you say?
Yeah. I'm not sure I want to talk about winter, but let's talk about drought first. All right. Let's see, where is it still dry and where do we need a little rain?
Yeah, I tell you what, we'll take a look at as a comparison here, which we like to do from, early in the growing and planting season around here to where we're at right now. And there was the snapshot, the drought monitor as of late May across the country. And yeah, a little dry area or two in parts of the Corn Belt, particularly western reaches. We had made some good progress into parts of the plains that western, at least especially the southwestern parts of the country, New Mexico, West Texas, ongoing issues there past May, continuing on currently. And again, we had made great improvement through California, but more so really areas from the Missouri and the Mississippi on east. Big improvement with the exception of parts of Central and South Florida. Drought monitor now from late last week here. And there it is showing expanding dryness issues over Ohio. If you were to take into account, I think it's about 68% of corn and beans that are either in the good or excellent category. You could probably find what's left of that 100%, about a quarter of them into eastern and southern Ohio that are in the midst of that dryness and drought, and probably already have heard of some crop losses out there across the Buckeye State. They did get a little moisture from Debbie, the western flank of that, and other than that, and Beryl a few weeks prior to that, it has been a dry summertime season across the Buckeye State. We're in relatively good shape across the eastern Corn Belt. Of course, it was really too much of a good thing. I think places in East Central Illinois, Champaign, Danville had over 8 inches of rain for the month of July. A place called Nashville, Illinois, a little southeast of St. Louis, had double-digit totals. Levees were broken there coming off the Mississippi. And you can see kind of a worsening. Some of this is typical of the western states along the divide in the Pacific Northwest, and hence that's helped to increase fire potential and ongoing fires. I think it's like 310,000 acres of fire underway, or at least burned acres in the Pacific West and Northwest. I think it's about 105, 110 last look I saw the some of the fire data, actual fires that are going on, but there's some of it that's under control, and there's some weather that will begin to help out in that particular part of the country. But the Plain States is another area in the western Corn Belt, into at least its western fringes of Kansas and Nebraska to the scene, basically a worsening of drought conditions out there. This was the outlook as of the end of July from the National Weather Service folks. No endorsement, just showing you what's out there floating around on the web. And they anticipate, at least for the month of August, there should have been, by their estimates, improvement across Ohio. Not going to happen with no sign of any tropical systems. Steering currents up aloft are not real favorable. There is a feature coming in through in the short term over the next 48 hours as we move through about the 15th, 16th, and 17th of August that may bring some nominal rainfall, but that's it. And pretty much they're on target there for the western half of the country, particularly through Big Sky country and the Pacific Northwest. That was the monthly outlook. The outlook that took them through the end of October continues to be a little more, I guess, bullish on their behalf. thinking that there's going to be a significant improvement to dryness and drought in Ohio. We don't really see it going on. Matter of fact, from Debbie last week, there was some improvement. It resulted in flooding through the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic region. But if we recall back in that last drought monitor, lots of shades of beige and orange out in that particular part of the country. So that's their thinking around here, and everyone else, Sarah, remains kind of even keeled across the nation's heartland. So again, I think a little too optimistic, and we certainly are on the opposite end of that with worsening dryness and drought conditions, and probably again more significant crop losses. If you had a targeted area, it's in through Ohio, but everyone else, if you missed out on the severe and rains have been even keeled, you didn't have any lodging and blowdown and green snap because of the severe weather in July, then yeah, that 67, 68, almost 70% of the crop that looks good to excellent on corn and beans probably is very much realistic. And I think a lot of those corn numbers from the market people, I don't really follow that stuff a lot, but I guess the acreage on both ends, particularly in the bean side, is going to be much higher than anticipated. And as weather remains pretty much even keeled, I think going forward for the rest of the growing season.
Yeah, they say it's looking pretty good. So, I mean, and we've seen some stuff too, even around the world, right? With Greece, I mean, it's kind of on fire, as they say, and so it's not just here that we have a few fire issues taking place. So.
Exactly. Yeah, it's Earl Finkel, the gentleman that kind of cut my teeth in. Some of the folks who watch This Week in Agribusiness remember him. It was him and Orion that really pioneered this business. Would say abnormal weather gets you abnormal weather. It's really just kind of a trickle down rippling effect from one extreme to another across the globe or the hemisphere. And there's really no truer words when you talk about too much or too little as it applies to heat or rainfall, and really too much heat for that matter over the southern plains this summertime season.
What else you got for us?
All right, moving forward here, we go ahead and take a look, much as we have talked about in the past. I hate just rolling out a long-range forecast. You got to have a basis of meteorology involved with it. I think here's my soapbox portion of the program. I think there's just too much. Go out there, take a look at the 6 to 10 models out there running is what I'm trying to say, that have different solutions. It's 10 different ideas, 10 different thoughts, different forecasts, put it that way. So we are still grounded in the fact that there's a human element in weather forecasting. You got to know the meteorology, and you got to go from baby steps to walking to running to sprinting. So back to these squiggly lines here, the spaghetti chart. Really the main emphasis here, you can see that high, that H over the middle part of the country, over Kansas and Texas. It really doesn't move much, and that is representative of sinking air. Sinking air compressors. Folks who work in the equipment shed know you work with engines and all that kind of stuff. You're making heat. That's exactly what the atmosphere does. It's really piled up. It's the weight of the atmosphere pushing southward or downward, I should say. And that's the story. And that's why we come up even at this point in mid to almost late summertime and mid-August with triple-digit readings and feeling like 115 degrees with maybe some, variance back and forth, but the same hard-hit areas, Kansas, the Ozarks, Oklahoma, Texas, the worst, maybe the south half of the winter wheat belt will continue to take their lumps. And you can see that little troughiness here if we go the next 5 days through the 21st of August into the Pacific Northwest. Those systems tend to be dry based, so we tend to watch lightning and thunderstorm potential. So fires, we're not done with that in the west, nor worsening the drought conditions. And you can see systems, as we say, riding the ridge or going over the ridge of the top of the ridge, or the ring of fire represented by that H, disturbances that would kind of, what we say, carve out a U-shaped configuration to the upper level winds over the Appalachians, the eastern seaboard. We saw that with Debbie, as Debbie made landfall, and Debbie and tropical systems tend to realign the polar jet. This time, Ernesto is going to remain well out in the open waters of the Atlantic. And so there's a little troughiness going on and a marginally cooler air. And that's it. And you get locked into these weather patterns here for mid-summertime. The steering currents are weak, and they just basically stay there. So this is probably a snapshot for the rest of August into probably September. And maybe tough to pick out here, but there's no real substantial weather systems going through the 21st of August as well. You got a little Canadian high. You've got one over the Great Lakes region. You got a little boundary set up on the what we call the northern and eastern flank of the ridge, and it's there, as we've seen come across Iowa, Missouri, the past 36 hours rainfall. So the better prospects for rain, at least in the shorter term, continue to be in two areas. The next 48 to 60 50 hours in the eastern Corn Belt, then building back into the western Corn Belt as we head through the last probably week to 10 days to 2 weeks of the month of August. And speaking of Ernesto, that's the visible satellite picture. You can see that little open-eyed circulation came through Puerto Rico earlier on this morning. And that little string of cloudiness over the western Atlantic, that would be the southwest to northeast upper level wind pattern, the jet stream. So move Ernesto northward, shear it off, and direct it out in the open waters of the Atlantic. And there's really nothing else there, Sarah, coming off the African coast. We also have a visible there's a quick outlook there on Ernesto, and remaining out in the open waters. Maybe some wave action up and down the eastern seaboard, and that's about it. And a quick snapshot on the Pacific, which was active early in the summertime season and is beginning to wind on down, which kind of tells us that we are winding out quickly of an El Nino weather pattern. I thought about, as I told you off here, having a discussion point on Saharan dust and sand that comes off the African coast, and it's really sometimes helps to fire up tropical systems, and it can also be a detriment. So there's a fair number of blobs of Saharan dust coming off the African coast. So it'll be a busy season, but we have a little respite here over the next couple of weeks. But those tropics will impact a longer range fall forecast when we get to it here a little bit later on.
So do you think we're seeing an earlier start then to this storm season, the hurricane season, or is this pretty common, pretty normal?
Pretty normal, but for for the data at the start of the hurricane season, we thought we'd be well into things. This was Ernesto. We had Debbie and Beryl. Of course, they're still cleaning up from both of those systems in the Northeast and New England. Can't forget about those folks up there. I always get cards and letters in late January and February. I don't talk about the maple syrup operations in New England enough on This Week in Agribusiness. I've been educated many a time. And anyway, that part of the country has got a lot of rainfall this season. So yeah, I think it's going to get going. We're only here in mid-August, and we've got September, October. We think it's going to go into early November. And we were down in Florida for a little vacation back in late June. And those waters, either on the Gulf side in the Keys, it feels like 90 degrees. It feels like bath water down there. So I think give it some time. If we can get that shearing effect, that trough out of the Western Atlantic, and get a little channeling effect going, I think that'll happen. That's probably not going to get going till the very end days of August or early part of September at the earliest.
Yeah, it sounds like Puerto Rico might have gotten hit quite a bit too. I think I saw a report where like half the power was out down there. I think there's still, I've been down there before, and gorgeous area, but the range of built up areas versus things that are more rural. And I think it was Maria, I believe, that went through there a few years ago. I think they are probably still cleaning up in some of those more rural areas. So yeah, those tropical islands, when you get hit, it hurts you for a while on that particular part of the hemisphere. So what else you seeing?
Okay, here the next 24 hours, as if you're viewing this here later on, this is as of the 14th to the 15th of August, and there it is, some welcome rain for some of the drier spring grain areas. If you want an area of the country that's maybe a little more hampered in growth and development, they're a little bit behind schedule on late season development on the outside and spring grain areas through the Dakotas and Southern Canadian Prairie, but they need the rain. They'll get the rain. You can see the little trickle-down effect into Iowa, Minnesota, and some of those drier reaches of the Western Corn Belt to get rain. And if you put that overlay the next 7 days, everyone across the Corn Belt will get, for those late planted beans, significant rainfall. These should be non-tropical variety. Can't rule out a couple of stronger storms. They may be a little bit repetitive, but areas that need the rain will get it. Others that are still marginally wet and probably had some crop damage, well, it's not going to really matter now. But I think, including Ohio, this is probably one of their last significant rains to come through there till we get maybe deeper into September. Again, that they probably are done with any significant yield gain in that particular part of the Corn Belt, and something back into the plains, the Southwest, as you would expect for the time of year, and to the Pacific Northwest, and so the tropical rains as you would expect in the rainy season down through Florida, with nothing of a named natured tropical feature moving in that particular part of the country. country. So let's take a look at some of the longer range weather maps and charts back to the green spaghetti lines. And again, no change here. There's that circle, that dome, that high over Oklahoma and New Mexico and Texas. There's the trough, the U-shaped configuration in the Pacific Northwest, one over the eastern part of the country. And you can also see kind of a real fast compaction of lines, the green, the blue, the dashed red up in Alaska and areas of the southern sections of the Arctic Circle. So that's beginning to tell us, okay, there's cold air, obviously, as the season shortened around here, but it's a split flow. And split flows, meaning one branch of the jet versus another, if you can keep them separated and stay what we call in the southern branch of the jet stream or steering currents, that's good news from an outdoor work and harvest standpoint, a crop maturation standpoint. So there's another little trip off of maybe the direction we're thinking here, at least that's weather forecaster going down the line for the rest of summer and into the fall season around here. Temperatures from the feds a little overdone. We reflected this on last weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. We think that cooling is a little bit too much. Probably daytime readings more in line into the low and mid 80s. You put that with low to mid 60s. You have a great accumulation of growing degree day units. So kind of the right idea, maybe the wrong measure if you wanted to put it in cooking terms. And this is pretty straightforward as well. We are moving into, after this rain heading through the 14th to the 17th of August, we are moving into a drier period of weather across a good part of the Midwest corn and bean complex. No organized rains. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't have a good tab of where they're at with winter wheat planting operations, but they'll need to get some moisture in those fields across Oklahoma and Texas, but none foreseen out through the 13th. If we take it out another couple of days, heading through the 27th, just about essentially the end of the month of August, you can see what we call a little westward jog or retrogression. Yes, weather does move west to east. We call it retrogression. And you'll see some of that hot ridging moving it in more or less centered over the southwestern part of the country. The systems still come over the top of the ridge over the Dakotas through the Great Lakes region and points to the north and east. So that tells us temperatures will stay in check. Nominal rainfall chances around the Corn Belt, and certainly that applies to the central and southern Plain States areas, and a little moisture, but more lightning-based, dry-based thunderstorms in the Pacific Northwest, and what should stay probably early fallish, if you want, into the Northeast and New England. This looks a little more realistic. I'd almost prefer to see this over the next 6 to 10 days and 8 to 14 days. Let's just essentially through the rest of the month of August, we'll average generally most days, if you keep track of this type of thing from a growing degree day standpoint, 1 or 2 or 3 degrees above average or a couple degrees below average on any given day, daytime to nighttime, taking us through the rest of August into the September. So if you do the calculations on that, that still puts the crop at a rapid pace, except for some of the, again, worst storm hit or drought areas across sections of the Corn Belt. So that's temperatures, precip. Yeah, that's the story. And we think this is a pretty good snapshot getting into September and probably a good part of October, Sarah. So the longer range weather maps and charts, we concur at least with the general thinking on what's been running around there on the internet. And again, we've had some deviation on that in our thinking on This Week in Agribusiness, but we do here coming up next, whenever you're ready, at least, well, we've talked about essentially the rest of summer around here. The fall outlook is going to be based on meteorological fall. Starts in September, ends on the 30th of November. And we'll have a couple of thoughts on the wintertime season as well. So we are ready if you are ready.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. And first, here we go into temperatures for September. We continue to, and pardon my typo up here, right there, that should be very, not very why. Anyway, what we're trying to point out, sometimes you get into this time of the year where, normal doesn't quite fit right in describing temperatures, because you do typically get into a variance of temperatures as long as your crop is moving along. There's no hard frost or freeze. And I think most areas, even if we do get an early frost, are going to be in a good position to withstand that. And there should be no, except for maybe the latest late planted variety of beans, I think most everyone ought to get through in relatively good shape. So cool air through the Canadian prairie. That is still some summertime heat across the plains. And by the way, Sarah's still thinking that readings will be maybe close to between about 85 and 90 over at the Farm Progress Show in the last week of August, and generally a dry 3-day time frame out there. I think Matt Youngman will like that especially. In any event, here we go into precipitation, and it's about normalized to maybe a little below over the Corn Belt. Complicating matters here is when we get systems that come up through the Pacific, and here is the start of two coming through the Pacific that kind of stops the weather systems. So west of those tropical looking lows up aloft, you tend to build high pressure up aloft, and so systems that run into that either weaken, they stall out, or they dry out. So we think with some semblance of tropical moisture in our front nearby, the wettest of weather will be over the southeastern states. Not great again with cotton. I think that took a big hit on Debbie last week over the Carolinas and any other summer crops out there, and a wet weather pattern, which they do not need any more of into the northeast of New England. I would anticipate probably some sense of a landfall in one system and another one up through the northeast of New England at some point here into the early to middle parts of September in particular. Going forward into October. Now, we kind of took a two-pronged approach here for October with the temperatures, at least through mid-October, are very much late summer-like, probably some record warmth. And if you put that along with humidity values that are in check, you have probably the makings of moving, if you have a little breeze involved, 1/4 to maybe 3/4 of a percentage point of moisture out of grains, summer crops of corn, for example, and moisture reduction, dry down, evaporative losses, all the lingo that producers like to hear without having to take it and move it to the drying bin. I think Mother Nature, at least into September and through mid-October, continue to be very much in your quarter too. So a little cool air return into the western states where the pattern is beneficial. That should be their first probably significant fall feature of moisture in the Pacific Northwest out through Big Sky Country of the Northern Rockies. Still a tropical system or two that may come into, again, it's favored in two areas. One for the Mid-Atlantic region, another one that may have come in through the Western Gulf and across Texas into the Rio Grande. So again, things get locked up and stalled out, wet weather east and south. Good news if this plays out for Texas, but sometimes those tropical rains are all or nothing. They go from, literally a drought from a flood. You get runoff, a lot of runoff with even some absorption, but again, wrong way to get moisture in that particular part of the country. Good news with early harvest in mind across the Corn Belt. The main storm track is up through the Canadian Prairie, dips into the northeast of New England. So we're thinking at least through mid-October, a drier than average weather pattern for much of the heartland. So good news for most, and especially from a crop maturation and early harvest standpoint. We do get a change, but it's nothing worse. Again, my typos are just horrible here today. Vary versus vary, but in any event, things will vary temperature-wise, and it could vary a lot out of Big Sky across Idaho in through the mid-Mississippi Valley in the northeast of New England. They'll get at least that northern branch of the jet to begin to settle on southward. There's late season warmth over the western part of the country and over the southeastern sections, and there's a subtle U-shaped configuration to the steering current. So it's probably mid and late October, particularly late October, before we see a transition here into a wetter weather pattern. So if you got things lined up correctly, you made it through the summertime okay, equipment's ready to go, boots on the ground, here you go off to the races and what should be a pretty good start and probably a fast start to harvest operations across the Corn Belt with tropical rains still lingering into late October. Remember, the season goes until November 30th in the Atlantic Basin, so we think it's going to stay busy despite the slow and sluggish nature to the tropical weather season thus far. Now on to November. No big headlines. Will vary between normal and up and down on readings, typical mid to late autumn temperature pattern. We may see our first late arriving frost or freeze, obviously, then probably go back in the other direction. There's no big cold air intrusions, again, with the split jet stream configuration that we see here at the office here. So again, a very much manageable setup out there with the temperatures in mind, no extreme issues for livestock operations as well. We do see a little propensity for a little more moisture. Some of that would actually be of benefit to maybe some of the winter wheat fields across the Midwest, particularly into the Ohio Valley. Need more rain in the northeast of New England, so that may be a headline story developing out there. One more little suspicious thing that was on the longer range weather maps and charts here out across the Southwest Atlantic. We'll see what transpires there. So that's the story, Sarah, for the autumn season around here. No big headlines, recurrent spells of heat, beneficial heat. We'll get deeper into fall, some swings of temperatures you'd expect, and no big multiple winder uppers that have excessive moisture, a lot of high wind where you get lodging and blowdown. So again, if you made it through the barrage of tough weather in July, I think the harvest season and the fall season look to be pretty sedate across much of the plains and the Corn Belt.
Very insightful, Greg. I don't know how you spell that, but very insightful.
Obviously incorrectly. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. That's what happens when I only check the graphs twice instead of the usual 3 times, and I'm got to do radio ahead of time. So my bad. And believe me, when I put the TV show together, I'll check things here at the home office.
There you go.
Get into the studio. We'll start rolling with stuff, and then someone will pick something up. We got to stop these cameras, go back and change it, and go from there. So the weather guy's forecast are much better than his spelling of it.
Speaking of the weather guy and This Week in Agribusiness and the Farm Progress Show, which are all coming up here. Actually, we're going to have a combination of all that here at the end of the month, August 27th through the 29th. But Greg will be down there. I'll be down there. I think you're going to be doing This Week in Agribusiness from the main stage in the hospitality tent. Yep. So if you want to see how the magic is made, I believe that's on, is that Tuesday or Wednesday?
Tuesday at Tuesday, the back end, the back end of the noon show that goes to 2. So I think somewhere between about 2 and 5 will be, and usually I'm the last guy to get to. But it's one of these election years, I'm sure, and you have a lot of the representatives that folks don't really get to have a meet and greet with. So Max and Mike, obviously they'll get that accomplished. And so somewhere in that mid to late afternoon, you'll see it. We don't have the magic green screen with us. We'll have to do it what we call full screen, but you'll see the weather guy in action. And yes, it's just radio with pictures. That's all it is.
So put that on your calendar if you're in Boone, Iowa, which might be a little hot, but perhaps a little dry as well. Which we
backed off on temperatures a little bit. Somewhere in the 85, maybe close to 90-degree range. We can manage that, and nights will start off probably dewy in the morning with probably some upper 50s and low 60s. So, well, I tell you, I remember years at Decatur and then back at Boone before they paved the place and they came up with the idea of air conditioning. Some pretty tough years. The sweat rolling off of us taping the show with Max and Orion back in the day. So would you like a sneak peek, by the way, I don't want to forget about it, at the winter outlook around here? We do have that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, let's do it. I almost forgot about that. Let's do that.
I did as well with my typing. So in my spelling, I think these are spelled correctly. It looks like they are. So this is December, and we expect the start of 2 things. Obviously, we're going to dislodge the cold air. What else is new? It's December, but a range. You can see this cold air through the western 2/3 of the country, warmth over the southeast, and you get that compaction of temperatures. It does help to fuel a pretty impressive weather pattern, a busier one. And so that is your deadline. Get it done before Thanksgiving. You want to get it done before Thanksgiving to begin with, but looks like there'll be what we see, Sarah's a La Nina year. So we'll move ocean waters to average or typical. And then La Nina means a cooling of those waters in the Pacific. And it kind of realigns the whole jet stream pattern all over again. And usually means that there's a high pressure over across the sections of the Eastern Pacific. You put that U-shaped trough over the middle part of the country, the divide, and you just swing those systems in from southwest to northeast. So there'll be moisture and hopefully some moisture improvement and hopefully the start of some recharge. But the La Nina winter weather pattern, and we'll maybe have some additional details on this when we get together in September. We'll start to put together the long-range weather forecast for the winter time season. So it's La Nina. It usually means a little more character building, but tell me about a Midwestern winter that usually isn't. But we haven't had many of those, really, to tell you the truth, over the past few years across these parts of the plains of the Corn Belt.
We've probably gotten a little soft, to tell you the truth, right?
Yes, I think so. Yes, exactly.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Greg. Thanks for a great outlook and for a fall outlook. And we'll look forward to talking more about winter coming up here soon.
Yes, exactly. And we'll see you over at Farm Progress. We won't be out there at Husker, but we'll be there and then on that Tuesday. And come on up, and I'm okay with you. Anyone that says, "Hey, I can do that too," so
or give them a hard time from the crowd. That's August 27th through the 29th in
Yep.
Boone, Iowa.
Yep.
And Greg will be up on that stage sometime later in the afternoon on the 27th.
Or
If you
just
want
walking the
to,
grounds as well.
say
People,
hey. Yep.
yeah, people will just stop me, and that's fine. I'm cool with that too. So,
And we'll also be live streaming the noon show with Mike Pearson and Max Armstrong of This Week in Agribusiness. So lots going on, a lot of things happening at the Farm Progress Show, plus a lot of new new technology and a lot of things going on. So anyway, hope to see you all there. Thank you, Greg.
thank you.
See you next month.
See you then.
Thank you all for joining us here today for Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead.